Hello, Garland Nixon, and we're hanging out with Scott Ritter. Lots to talk about on a Thursday morning. Let's talk. Hello, one and all, and we're hanging out with Scott Ritter. All right. Okay, let's get going. Before we get going, I got to ask you about this, Scott. You know, I always say I'm kind of an old school knuckle dragging kind of guy, and the word goon is not a bad thing to me. I sometimes refer to myself as a goon. You know, the guy on the hockey team that they send him in to hit people. You know what I mean? He's not a finesse player. His job is I want you to go out and slam into some people, and I want them hurting when they come to the sideline. Great guy, love him. You know, the tight end, all he does is blocks. Comes off the line, bam, drills somebody into the ground and comes back, yelling. And the coaches are like, good job. Your job is to hit somebody and hit them hard. I love that guy. I'd like to be that guy, right? And there's a place for that guy. The place for that guy is not to run the Pentagon. And Hegseth is a friggin' goon. That's all he is. You know what I mean? You know the word. I love goons. A lot of my friends are goons. Some of my best friends are goons. As I said, to some extent, I'm a proud goon. But I ain't running the Pentagon or appearing to run the Pentagon. And I listened to this guy talking to generals, talking to people who'd been, I'm not saying West Point's grade or whatever, but people who had studied military history, had knowledge, and this clown who does nothing but like push-ups and sit-ups in front of the troops, like he's a drill instructor, comes out lecturing these, we're not going to do this and that, and if you do, you can just walk. I know they wanted to grab him and just choke him to death on the spot. Anyway, Scott, does it aggravate you as much as it aggravates me to see this clown?
It did. I mean, I gave him a fair shot. And to be frank, I would say maybe 70% of what he said, I said, there's merit in these arguments. There's not, I mean, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble, but hey, what the hell? When the Marine Corps was tasked with, Marine Corps was the last service that held the ground on, all men combat arms. And there's a reason. And there were studies done, and the studies show that all male units are more lethal. We kill better, and we take fewer casualties, which in combat, that's two combinations you want. And the Marine Corps made an argument for that, backed it up with studies and all that, and they lost because we don't live in a dictatorship run by Marine generals. We live in a democracy where civilian leadership and the word of the civilian leadership takes precedent. And the Marine Corps saluted smartly and has been trying very hard to integrate women into the combat arms ever since then. I would say that anybody in the world who thinks that they can hook and jab with a Marine Corps combat unit today, think again, because you will die. Because the Marines continue to be the best trained, best equipped, best motivated, most lethal combat force in the world today, man for man or Marine for Marine. But we could have been better, be it all male. I firmly believe that. And I think, he has an argument there. We know, for instance, in Air Force Special Operations, when they were trying to push women through the training pipeline, they had to lie, cheat, and steal to get women through that pipeline. Make fun of the Air Force all you want, and I do all the time because it's fun. But when we're talking about their pararescue men and we're talking about their combat controllers, these guys are as tough as they get. They go through every selection criterion that the SEALs and Delta Force and Special Operations. These are the combat controllers that hang out with these guys, integrate with them, call in the close air support, coordinate the airspace, and oftentimes parachute into minefields to rescue them when their vehicle has hit a mine. Parachute at night into minefields, by the way. They did that in Afghanistan. And, women have not qualified for this. And they've tried to make women qualify, and women can't qualify. In the Marine Corps, our infantry officers course, which is considered to be one of the toughest selection programs in all of the military, had a very grueling forced march with pack timed. And what had happened is that women couldn't complete it, primarily because of the physical build. Shin splints was a big problem. And they couldn't complete. So the Marine Corps was told to change that standard. And the argument was that in this day and age, no Marine walks that far with that much weight under that time pressure. That's an artificial standard put in that actually doesn't contribute to actual combat. And the Marine Corps did change its standard, and women do graduate IOC. And I believe the women that graduate IOC and become infantry officers in the Marine Corps are some of the best of the best. I don't know. I've never served. When I was in, it was all male. But my point is, Hegseth has some interesting arguments. I mean, what is the impact on unit morale? And, in unit morale, there's a direct correlation between unit morale and combat effectiveness with what he called dudes in dresses. Is that an issue? I know the Marine Corps got rid of a battalion commander who was one of their best combat leaders, proven in combat. He was prepared to take a Marine battalion forward and due to become regimental commander, probably work his way up into the higher ranks. Because in an address to his Marines, a motivational address, he used language that a Marine found objectionable and filmed it, and the man was relieved on the spot. This was during the Biden administration. But those are the standards. Hazing. When I went through Officer Candidate School, I did the junior course and the senior course. The junior course was done under the old rules, and the old rules were they put hands on you, and they put my face into the wall. They adjusted my helmet with violence. They did what they needed to do to get my attention. The next year, it had changed. There were no more hands, and I will tell you that even though the yelling didn't go away and the fatigue, it's a completely different level of training when you don't have to fear for your life. When at the end of the day, you can say they're not allowed to touch me. That gives me a little. When you fear for your life, you don't want to do anything to make them unhappy, because then they swarm you with the shark attack and you will feel physical pain. And as a Marine, I got to say that physical pain thing, it contributes to being to a Marine. People smarter than me who study psychology and all this, they say that we train good Marines today without that. And I'm not here to doubt them, because I can just say that I know and I experienced the difference between hands-on and hazing. I think hazing for the sake of hazing is stupid. But I will tell you this. We had something in my battalion, 5th Battalion, 11th Marines, we called the Sergeant Major's Move. Sergeant Major's Move happened once or twice a year. When we took the battalion to the field, the battalion commander would meet with the Sergeant Major, and the Sergeant Major would tell him that there are a number of disciplinary issues that need to be resolved. And we can resolve them either through, Article 15 or, page 11 entries, ruin a Marine's career, or if they're good Marines, we can give them a second chance. And the second chance comes in the form of the Sergeant Major's Move, where the battalion is turned over to the Sergeant Major and the staff NCOs and such, and they move the battalion. And as the battalion moves to the field, they move efficiently. But when they get to the place where they are in the desert, things happen, like the gauntlet. If you were a Marine who made mistakes, you were given a choice. Article 15, page 11, other than honorable discharge, or run the gauntlet. And they chose to run the gauntlet. And they got the living dog poop kicked out of them. The Marines, as they ran through, beat the living crap out of these people. And sometimes if you were made a bit, you ran it twice. And then the officers would come out the next day. And of course, we're not allowed to tolerate these things. So we would see Marines who had black eyes and maybe missing a tooth and a broken nose. And we'd say, what happened? I fell out of a truck. Really? Now, I was the officer that was called, because I was a junior lieutenant at the time, to investigate. And so I would have to hold an investigation. And I was told not to dig too deep. Let the Marine statements stand. So you fell out of a truck. Yes. Do you have any witness to you falling out of a truck? Yes. Sergeant Schmuckatelli observed me falling out of the truck. Sergeant Schmuckatelli, what were the circumstances of falling out of the truck? Was the Marine improperly secured? The Marine failed to obey proper instructions and the Marine fell out of the truck, but the Marine has been counseled and will not fall out of the truck again. Boom, Marine fell out of truck. And that's it. We can't do Sergeant Major move today. If a Marine talked about running the gauntlet, that would be the end of the battalion leadership. Everybody would be fired. That's just the way it is. We don't do that anymore. And as a result, units aren't as cohesive and people walk on eggshells. And Pete Hegseth is correct on that. Hazing. When I graduated Naval Aerial Observer School, it's a tough program. Teaching an idiot like me how to fly and operate in the air, it's challenging. But when you graduate, you get your wings. And what the Marine Corps would do back in those days, when you got airborne wings or you got your flight wings, they would give you blood wings. And it was a rite of passage. You would stand there at attention and they'd take the wings. And normally you'd put it through the shirt and then fasten it in the back with the little round things. They'd put there on and then they'd pound it in your chest. And then everybody of the instructors came by and they punched those wings into your chest and they drove that deep into your flesh. And it hurt like hell. And then afterwards, while you drank your beer, blood was, you have your wings on your uniform. That uniform was finished because it had blood stains because you were bleeding through, but that was a sign of you made it. Sign of respect. You went through that ritual and now you were part of the fraternity. The problem is, gosh, you could get infection. Bad things could happen and it hurt like hell. And they said, you can't do that anymore. Fact is, when they did it to me, it was technically illegal. So hazing, there's a reason why we don't haze. And I think Hegseth needs to be careful. But the biggest thing is all of the changes that he's talking about. These are changes that are systemic in nature. And to make them happen, you have to work with the team. You sit there. If he wanted to make these changes, he needs to send out an initiating, bulletin and say, hey, we're concerned about the fault. When I'm requesting the service, because there's chain of command, you don't go to the generals. You're the Secretary of Defense. You go to the Secretary of the Air Force, the Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of the Navy, and you say, I got a problem. Then they go to their generals. Now, you as Secretary of Defense could also go to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and ask for a coordinated review. But then they push it down and they get answers coming up and they coordinate the answers and they double check and they make sure that everybody's on board. Then they come to you and say, here's what we've come back with. Now, the Secretary of Defense could look at that, Secretary of War, and say, no, I don't want to do this. I want more information on that. But when it's done, when you stand before your generals, everybody's in agreement. Those generals, and I've seen some pretty stupid comments from people out there, because they buy into Hegseth thing, fat generals. Hey, you guys know who Curtis LeMay is, don't you? Cigar chomping head of the Air Force. I mean, he bombed Germany into the Stone Age and he dropped the nuclear weapons on Japan. And he's the guy that took out them Chi-Coms in North Korea. And he stared Kennedy in the face, chomping a cigar, and said, we got to bomb them Ruskies in Cuba, because I'm Curtis LeMay. I'm Bomber LeMay. I'm the man in the world. Nobody's going to sit there and say he's not a warrior. He's a hell of a more warrior than Pete Hegseth ever was or ever could dream to be. Man couldn't run a PFT. He's a fat body. So Hegseth saying that you can't have Curtis LeMay in the military. George Patton, who Hegseth mentioned, didn't run a PFT in the final 10 years of his career. Didn't do it. Couldn't. Old man. Omar Bradley, Dwight Eisenhower, all the heroes of the Second World War. They didn't run PFTs. Some of them were out of shape. You wouldn't want to see them with their shirts off. All right. So, there's a reality as you work your way through the ranks. You stop being a platoon commander. See, that's the problem with Pete Hegseth. He's a platoon leader. When I ran my platoon, no one cares, Pete. No one cares because that's a platoon level stuff. You're talking to 4-star generals who are running the big show, who've done things you can't even dream about, who've led commands, thousands, hundreds of thousands of men and women who are responsible for billions of dollars worth of stuff going on. These are the leaders that, make this stuff work. And you're sitting there making fun of them. Yeah, I agree. We shouldn't have fat bodies, especially at the troop level. I mean, everybody saw those people marching and, remember Trump's birthday parade, and some of them marching probably shouldn't have been marching, should have been doing some PT before. I'm a big fan of PT. Unit PT is great. Everybody who's been in a unit understands the value of it and understands the importance of being physically fit. Nobody's trying to denigrate that. But to have the Secretary of War, which is another thing. I mean, let me just remind people who think that's a cool name. The reason why we got rid of the Secretary of War and called it Secretary of Defense is because of World War II. Guys got to be consistent here, historically consistent and qualitatively consistent. We finished World War II and we held a bunch of Germans accountable and Japanese. We hung them by the neck until dead, by the way, for carrying out wars of aggression, illegal wars of aggression. In fact, the Nuremberg trials found that wars of aggression were the greatest war crime ever because from them came all other war crimes. So we created something called the United Nations. The United States created that. We led the charge. We helped draft the charter. And the charter says there's only a couple of conditions under which war is authorized. Article 51, if you've been attacked, self-defense. Self-defense is what you're allowed to do. And then a Chapter 7 resolution by the Security Council finds that military action can be authorized to reverse somebody else attacking, somebody else creating problems that has to be dealt with. So the decision was that we were no longer the Department of War because war wasn't good. War wasn't desirable. We didn't want war. We became the Department of Defense. And Hegseth, sat there and talked about several things. He talked about the Gulf War and how we won the Gulf War because of the ethos that he spoke of, the 1990s E6 ethos and the 03 ethos. Hey, guys, you're looking at it right here. That was my era. I was in 03 in 1990. Exactly the kind of guy he's talking about. And I knew the E6s that he's talking about. And I had gone through the training that he was talking about. We were the best prepared fighting force the world had ever seen in 1990. And that's why the Gulf War was a walk in the park. But we were the Department of Defense at the time. I just want to remind you, we won that war as the Department of Defense. And he spoke about the Vietnam War. And one of the reasons why the Gulf War succeeds is senior leadership and experience. So they were the Department of Defense then as well. Changing the name from defense to war doesn't do anything except make you look stupid and make America look stupid and make America look foolish. And summoning 800 of our most senior generals, admirals, commanders, top enlisted to assemble in Quantico while our nation's at risk. Keep in mind, he pulled people off of literally frontline positions where they are monitoring dangerous situations that could spin out of control. Yes, there are deputies, but many of them were there too. To do what? To play alpha dog, to literally lift his leg and pee on them, because that's what this was about. This was about Pete Hegseth peeing on people. He's not even a good goon, because a goon is part of a team. See that tight end? I was a tight end in college. I know exactly what you're talking about. I was also on the suicide squad on special teams. My job was to inflict pain on the enemy. Purely and simply. Sometimes to catch a football, but mainly my job was to inflict pain on the enemy. But it has to be done as part of a team. For instance, I remember once on the kickoff coverage, my coach came up to me after they ran the ball away from me, and he said two times in a row, "If you're not in on the next tackle, you're off the squad. I brought you here because your job is to hunt the man with the ball, bring that man down, and bring pain to that man. You're not doing your job, off the squad." I'm like, okay, coach. And the next time we kicked off, I went beeline for the guy with the ball. He took 2 steps out of bounds, and I knocked the living crap out of him on national TV, by the way, because this was during the NFL strike. And so there was no NFL games. And so what they did is they moved Division I to Sundays, and they elevated Division III regionally. So we were literally on the regional TV, the whole East Coast of America was watching Ritter commit the most flagrant foul on the face of the earth because the coach said, take him out. And I did, but I wasn't a good team player at that point in time because I cost my team a 15-yard penalty. Goons have to be controlled. They have to be controlled by smart people, wise people. Pete Hegseth is a goon, and nobody's controlling him. The president of the United States has bought into the goonism. This was a dark day for the United States military and for the United States of America. Those generals didn't deserve this. And Pete Hegseth made a fool out of himself. And the sad thing is there's a significant percentage of the American population to think that what he did was good. You don't understand anything about the military. And many of these people are veterans. And they don't, I'm just saying that you guys have a skewed concept of reality because the military is not a military full of goons. The military is full of professionals, teams that work to defend the United States of America. If called upon, sometimes we have to carry out aggressive acts. And yes, we need to act with lethality, audacity. We need to act quickly, rapidly, and that requires training. And you have to be physically fit. Pete Hegseth's right on all this stuff. But the way to do that isn't to sit the generals down, open their mouths, and piss in their mouths. The way to do that is write memorandum and get the team to work together to come up with concepts that A, are better for the force, and B, are compatible with the Congress of the United States, the American people. Hegseth sat there and just denigrated politicians the whole time. I want to remind Pete that he's paid by the American taxpayer, and that money gets filtered through the Congress of the United States. And if he thinks for a second that he can implement all the things he's talking about without congressional approval, he's higher than a kite. And that's the other thing. Vast majority of the things that he's going to try to implement are not going to be implemented because they're going to run into legal challenges. Parents of people who are going to get hazed are now going to get lawyers, and those lawyers are going to write congressmen. There's going to be a congressional inquiry, and that's going to freeze the Department of Defense. Pete Hegseth's an idiot, a moron. He's not a goon. A goon is somebody who's part of the team. Andre the Giant was a goon. He was the goon squad. And he did good things because he worked as part of a team. Remember, he collaborated with the plan on how to take the castle down in The Princess Bride. But Hegseth doesn't collaborate with anybody but himself. He's a narcissistic man with a lot of problems, a lot of baggage, and that speech should never have happened. And the president of the United States should never have allowed it to happen. And yet the president came up behind it and gave him his de facto seal of approval.
Yeah, and I think the big point I have is, there's things that he said that I would agree with you on when it comes to how do you have the most effective fighting force. The issue I have is this: the man doesn't realize that he's a political figure, right? Yeah. When I went into training into what was it? We have, when you become a commissioned officer, we have commissioned officer training, right? That we had to go through. And basically what they say is, don't forget, when you're commissioned officer, you become a political figure. You're not just a, in that instance, law enforcement officer, but what you're saying has political consequences, could have political consequences for, in our instance, for the chief of police and the governor, blah, blah, blah. So watch what you say and how you say it. And if you have any questions, run it through somebody above you first, who's going to be ultimately responsible for it, right? So when I listen to Hegseth, that was not a political figure. So there are a lot of things that you said that quite eloquently about, look, we tried to have a female in this area. However, due to this, and this, we find that our force is more effective with the blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of eloquent. I'm listening to this guy. I'm like, that's not a political figure. That guy sounds like an idiot. The things that I agreed with and the things that I disagreed with sounded stupid. And they sounded like they were coming from a guy who was he couldn't even understand the position that he's in and what his job is, much less how to execute it. So I'm just like, he's an absolute embarrassment. And as you said, what we're seeing is this, okay, we might have to attack Iran. And at the same time, we might have to attack Venezuela. And I'm like, so now we're not even going to make up a lie anymore about our aggressive, like, imperialist wars. We're just going to be like, yeah, we might have to attack Venezuela. Why? I don't know. What do you think? Drug boats, yeah, drug boats, yeah, that's it. Drug boats. It has nothing to do with their oil supply. What about Iran? Well, they won't really do what we say when it comes to the Palestinians. I mean, perhaps something to do with uranium or something. And it's just like now, it's just like, and Russia now we're getting this absurdities about, hey, we might have to engage with Russia in Europe. They got nothing to engage Russia with. And I'm hearing the U.S. and its military alliances sound like lunatics who now are just like, we'll attack. I'm like, are we in 1930s Germany where we just cook up a story to attack a country and do it? Kind of, yeah.
No, it's an embarrassment. First of all, when I was in the Marine Corps, General Al Gray was my commandant. And I remember when he became the commandant, I was in 29 Palms, California, brand new, freshly minted second lieutenant. And Al Gray was this legend. I mean, Korean War veteran, Silver Star winner. He's the man of men. And, Al Gray was also 60 years old and, had the body of a 60-year-old man. But when Al Gray walked into a room, nobody went, fat general. Everyone went, holy, Al Gray, good God. And when he turned on us, and he did, I mean, he mocked us because we were Marines that we were running, the whole Marine Corps was about maxing the physical fitness test. I'm a 300 PFTer. That means that I could run 3 miles in under 18 minutes. I could do my 20 pull-ups and my 100 sit-ups in I forget what it was, a 2-minute span or a minute span or something. But, I could do that as a young stud. But he sat there and he said, the Marine Corps isn't about marathon runners. And we're not, these beautiful gym boys. So we're supposed to fight wars. And so what he instituted was a 25-mile forced march, battalion level, where everybody had to do a forced march for 25 miles. At the end of the 25 miles, do various tactical and operational maneuvers. And you fought with the Marines you had, meaning that on the way, if your Marines were dropping out from blisters or shin splints or this, and you lost 30%, you went to war with 70%, and you had to operate, do the tasks accordingly, not well rested, exhausted, no sleep. And when he said that, nobody went, well, he's a fat body telling us what to do. Everyone went, holy cow, Al Gray, the legend, just told us what has to happen. And everybody, nothing but the highest respect for the man. Nothing. Nobody sat there and went, oh, fat body. Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense. His job isn't to do pull-ups, sit-ups, or to run. He humiliates himself every time he goes on a unit run with these guys because what he's doing is lowering himself to their level. You're the Secretary of Defense. When you walk into the room, people should be going, oh my God, the Secretary of Defense. I'm listening, I'm here. It should be awe. It shouldn't be, it's Pete. It's Pistol Pete. One of the guys. You're going to go running with us today, Pete? Let's go running. Oh, aren't you a good runner? Let's do pull-ups. Let's high-five each other. And once you do that, you've lost. That's why battalion commanders, when they form the battalion, they come out, they take control of the battalion formation in the morning from the sergeant major. They run the PFT or run the physical thing. Then they turn around and turn it back over and get the hell out of Dodge. Their job isn't to sit there and do things in front of these guys. When a battalion commander goes before his battalion, the battalion has to say, you are God Almighty, and we will treat you as God. Pete Hegseth should be God. Instead, he wants to be one of the boys. He wants to be that which he never was, special operator. I want to hang out with the special operators. I want to do all this special stuff. No, your job is actually to run a $1 trillion enterprise and to have, know things that you don't know. Pete's ignorant about everything. He's so ignorant that he stands there in front of the president, tries to sell him on a Golden Dome system, knowing that Lockheed Martin and Palantir's there just to make money, that it will never work. But he doesn't know that because he's too stupid to live. That Golden Dome didn't go through the standard, filters of experts saying it ain't going to work. He just jumped echelon, took it straight to the president. That's not a good Secretary of Defense. He's wasting our money. He's wasting everything. He's wasting our time. And frankly speaking, he's going to get Americans killed. Because let me make the following prediction. Pete Hegseth's military doesn't function like Pete Hegseth thinks it will. And when we go up against forces that are prepared for war, they are going to kick our ass in the initial fight. There's a famous book called America's First Battles. And it just goes through American battles. We always lose the first battle, generally speaking. We suck because we're not training for what needs to be trained for. Pete Hegseth right now is creating a dysfunctional military service, a service at war with itself. It's going to turn on itself, turn on the women, turn on minorities. Could you imagine being a black general in that audience listening to the crap that Hegseth was saying about, you're only there because you were the first? I'll tell you what, Pete, why don't you come down here and let me be the first one to rip your head off? I mean, those guys out there earned it. The medals on their chest aren't given to them, guys. They're earned. I'm not saying that there isn't one or two, DEI types that work their way up that maybe, shouldn't be where they're at. That happens all the time. Before DEI, we had a thing called, the general's aide. The general's aide usually was a really good looking captain, looked great in uniform. And what the general's aide did is go around and open doors and get the uniforms polished on time, get the shoes polished, and be the kiss ass of the general. And when it was done, he got a great fitness report and got promoted up. And all the other guys out there, all the other captains are, leading their companies in the mud and the dirt and everything. They don't get a medal. They don't get, and some of them got passed over because there's a lot of captains that doing that job. But the general's aide, up he goes, baby. There's that. There's always that. There's always the people that find the loopholes. But what you're betting on is the norm. And the norm in the United States military is a pretty damn good norm. And those medals those guys and gals got on their chest, they weren't given to them. They earned them. They earned them by being deployed in very bad places, very dangerous places, asking men and women to do things that could cost them their lives, their livelihood, their legs, their brains, drove many of them to suicide because war sucks. I'm not promoting war. I'm not glorifying war. I'm just saying that show some respect for the people that were sitting in that thing. And Pete Hegseth didn't show them any respect. He disrespected them the moment he ordered them to come and sit in that auditorium.
Yeah, that guy's just unbelievable. Anyway, let's move on. The EU, it's like you'll see on, you can go on YouTube and find this video of a little dog. I saw this one, there's these horses and these two dogs are chasing after this horse barking and the horse is running around. Then they're chasing after this and they're running after this horse and they're barking like hell and the doors. And finally, I guess the horse gets tired and the horse stops and kicks the shit out of one of these dogs, right? Wham! This freaking dog flops up in the air, falls on it, and off he goes. And I'm like, at what point did this dog forget that was a horse? You're barking. Yeah, barking. Yeah, you ain't gonna lose that. Kinetically speaking. Okay, here's my point. Macron, Starmer, yes, we might have to do a Western Ukraine shoot down drones. We're gonna have to grab a Russian ship. The Russians get no say. And I'm like, if a war actually kicks off in about 5 minutes, there'll be arrestniks raining on every one of your bases. We'll send some troops in. You're going to send a couple thousand troops in. If Russia so desires, they will live for minutes. You have nothing. You got nothing to fight with. You sent all your war material to Ukraine. It's been blown to smithereens. And yet you're like, yes, sir, we might have to stand up to Russians. We'll show them a thing or two. Scott, help me out here.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a very dangerous situation because perception creates its own reality. And what we've witnessed over the course of the last month is a massive information operation run by the British, by the way, just so everybody understands who's the secret power behind here, but fronted by Zelensky and the Ukrainians, and very effectively fronted. I mean, people like you and me have been calling it out, but, one thing that's been making the news lately is this Ukrainian counteroffensive. Donald Trump talked about it. The Ukrainians are attacking. They're taking back their territory, and it's very effective, and they're very awesome. Well, again, I just ask people, read your history. In the Battle of Berlin, as the Russians are driving on Berlin, it's called the end of the war for a reason, because the war is about to end. I think around 21 April. Remember the surrender was like May 4th or around there. May 8th, I think, because May 9th is the victory day. So May 8th was the actual surrender. May 9th when the Russians did it. But April 20th, as the Russians are making their drive on Berlin, The Germans down in the vicinity of Czechoslovakia launch a counterattack, 50,000 men. And a whole bunch of tanks, and they were going to punch north out of Czechoslovakia to try and cut the Russians off that were driving in there. And the counterattack went for 8 days, and it's considered a German victory because the Germans actually captured some villages and held on to those villages till the end of the war, and they inflicted harm on I think it was the 2nd Polish Army, and then the 57th Soviet Army was in there, and they got a bloody nose. The Germans concentrated sufficient forces at a localized time and place, and they launched a counterattack that captured land, punched through the Russian defenses. And yet, the Russians won the war, and those Germans became prisoners of war. Their little victory wasn't a victory at all. It was just a blip on the screen. What Zelensky was told by the British to do is that first of all, the president wasn't meeting with Zelensky. Did you all notice that, right? The president wasn't meeting with Zelensky after the embarrassment. But they knew that Zelensky had an opportunity to meet the president during the General Assembly debate in New York. And so they needed to create the conditions for this meeting to be a successful meeting. So Zelensky gathered his best strike forces, the 3rd Assault Brigade, which is the Azov Battalion, the Kraken Brigade, the Adar Brigade, and I think some others. And they brought them together and they launched a counterattack. The Russians had, instead of trying the classic envelopment of Pokrovsk, north of Pokrovsk, they had sheared north and were threatening, I think, going up towards Kupiansk and such. But they had sheared up, and so there was a bulge up there where the Russians had done. And so what the Ukrainians did is they brought in these forces and they launched a counterattack. And they also surged in drone capabilities. I'm talking massive drone capabilities. And again, when you're looking at war, the drone war, I've been studying this for some time now in great detail. I actually had a fascinating meeting with the head of a Russian drone unit that fights in the Lugansk area in support of the Akhmat Special Forces. And we went through the tactics, the operation, the thinking. But basically, think of the line of contact. And on each side of the line of contact, go 15 to 20 kilometers. The line of contact expanded to about a 5-kilometer depth strip. Okay, that's where your tactical drones are. And then on the side is where what you're trying to do is, if you're going to control the line of contact, you actually have to control 15 to 20 kilometers deep into the enemy's territory. And then what you have to do is ensure that your zone is drone free. So you're doing things that way. You can bring your reinforcements, the ammunition up to the line of contact, that 5-kilometer stretch, and then impose your will on the enemy in that line of contact and prevent the enemy from reinforcing. So you have your drones over here pounding them away. What the Ukrainians did is surge drone capacity into the area of Pokrovsk so that they took control of the line of contact and they took control of the 15 to 20 kilometer depth in there. And it was bad news for the Russians because now they've attacked. Russian troops are frozen. Some of them were physically surrounded. Others were surrounded by fire, meaning that even though the Ukrainians didn't control the land, if you tried to move through, you had drones and artillery and everything. And so you had 3 separate pockets created there. And the Ukrainians were driving through. And then they're broadcasting how great they are, how they've done this and they've done that and they've done this. They're talking about casualties. They didn't inflict that many casualties on the Russians. But it was bad for the Russians, just like it was for the Russians when the Germans counterattacked in April 21st. It was bad. The Germans hit them, and the Russians had to retreat, and some Russians died, and they lost tanks, and it was not a good thing. So the Russians, are dealing with that. But this was time so that Zelensky could come in, and Keith Kellogg is one of the instigators of this. He is working with the Defense Intelligence Agency to get the imagery. So now when Zelensky is briefing the president has been shown photographs that show the Ukrainians advancing. And that's why the president said, wow, you guys can beat the Russians. The Russians aren't that good. Why don't you go ahead and take it all back while you're at it and drive to Moscow while you're at it? Hey, good job. But that counteroffensive, just so everybody understands, is over. The Russians have taken control of the drone operations. How you do that is simple. The Ukrainians came in and they surged everything. A drone is operated by a human being. There is some AI factors in there, but the bottom line is humans launch it and fly out there. You'll either have fiber optics but each drone has an operational footprint. And what the Russians do while their troops are dodging drones and dying from drones is they have their reconnaissance radars and everything tracking this. And you develop what's called a pattern of life. And the pattern of life leads you from the drones to the drone operators. And then the Russians kill the drone operators. And that's what they've been doing. The most dangerous job in the Ukrainian military today is a drone operator in the Pokrovsk area because you're dead. You're already dead. The Iskanders come in, the other counter drones come in, and you get wiped out. And then the Russians come in, control that 15 kilometer you can't reinforce, and now they bring in their troops and they bring in their artillery, and the Ukrainian forces they're attacking get isolated, killed, slaughtered, and pushed back. And that's where we are today. The counteroffensive is over. And the Russians once again have regained control of that area as they maintain control of the entire line of contact. And they're slaughtering the Ukrainians as we speak. This is the reality. But for a moment there, they created a perception of Ukrainian victory, and that was sold to the president, and that helped guide the president because Keith Kellogg is a liar, 100% liar. And frankly speaking, the people that are supporting him, are so overwhelmed with Russophobia that they'll build on it. I mean, unfortunately, we know that the intelligence community is penetrated thoroughly by Russophobes, and they will lie. We saw that in their exaggeration and manufactured of data in 2016 to make it look like Putin wanted Trump to win when that wasn't the case. And today we see them doing the same thing, cooking the books. Remember, it was General Clapper. Remember old Clapper, he was the defense or the director of national intelligence for all.
Yeah.
But during the Gulf War and the lead up, he was told, we need to find weapons of mass destruction. And his answer should have been, we don't have any evidence of that. But instead, and he's admitted this in his book, he said, one of the worst moments of my life is when I said, we will make things look like WMD that we know aren't WMD, and we'll just lie about it. Well, that's the mindset that exists today. They know that the Russians aren't losing, but their job is to not tell the truth, but to shape perceptions. So they are reading into imagery things that don't exist. It's an absolute lie. So that happened. Then you have the whole drone attack against Poland, which we've talked about in the past, totally a manufactured event by the Ukrainians to achieve the result of what they've done, mobilize NATO. Now we see other things, for instance, the Shadow Fleet that's taking the Russian oil out. As it rounded Denmark, suddenly drones are flying over Denmark, and Zelensky says they're coming off the mothership, the Shadow Fleet. Now we have the French seizing the tanker in the Bay of Biscayne. That's not the case. This is all manufactured. The British are manufacturing all of this, and now they've achieved what they wanted, as the President of the United States allegedly okaying long-range strikes. Remember, this is the same president who said back in December of 2024 that if you do long-range strikes, you're creating the conditions for a nuclear war. Therefore, I, as president, won't allow these long-range strikes to take place. Now, apparently, he's changed his mind, and now there's talk about provision of Tomahawk and Barracuda missiles and things of that nature. First of all, these reporting came from the Wall Street Journal, and there's been no corroboration. So I think we need to be very careful about this. The Wall Street Journal is known to be promoting BS stories until I hear it from the White House that this is indeed the policy, because this is a declaration of war. People need to understand that if we are providing intelligence to Ukraine to carry out long-range strikes, we are now a declared party to the conflict. We are at war with Russia, and that is a completely different ballgame. So I'm very shocked. I'll be very shocked if the Trump administration has actually done this. But the bottom line is we have people trying to shape a perception that Ukraine is winning this war, can win this war, that Russia is losing this war. And it's leading to some very bad decision-making on the part of not just the United States, but the European Union, which was your question. But the European Union can't do anything. I mean, I think it was last night or 2 nights ago, the French, the senior French military commander ordered the French military to immediately go into the highest state of readiness to prepare to fight high-intensity conflict right now, tonight, because they seized the Russian ship. But France can't do that. I mean, that's like asking my Pop Warner team. I'm out there. I'm not, but let's say I was a Pop Warner coach. Call up the parents. Have your boys ready to play in the Super Bowl tomorrow. tomorrow you're going to take on the Super Bowl champions and you're going to play in the Super Bowl. And the parents are like, we got Pop Warner team. We can't do that. The French army is the Pop Warner team of war. So is the German army. So is NATO. It's all a joke. It's all hype. But it creates its own perception. At some point in time, somebody may do something stupid. There's talk right now about Europe talking about projecting a no-fly zone into Western Ukraine. That's an act of war and will be treated as such. The Russians aren't bluffing. Putin made a statement a couple of days ago that people should pay attention to. He said, we're not even trying. I mean, we're down there doing it, but we're not even trying. I mean, we're not doing what we could do. And, so just keep that in mind. The Russians don't want Ukraine to turn into a regional conflict, even though it has become not just a proxy war, but Lavrov has said it's a war. But Russia doesn't want to turn into a real war. And so they do end up tying their hands behind their back. There's things that could happen. And we saw hints of that when the Russians fired 2 Kinzhal missiles into a Ukrainian airbase, destroyed 5 F-16s and a whole bunch of Ukrainian pilots and a whole bunch of NATO ground crews, who maintain the airplanes and all that kind of stuff. They're dead. The Russians don't want to be killing people in the West because that could lead to, an escalation. But the Russians are sending a signal that we could do this all day, every day, if this is what you wanted. But we don't want it. Oreshnik, you mentioned that. It's there. It's real. But it's an escalation that Russia doesn't want to engage in. There's a new missile that's out there, the Iskander, I think S it is. But basically the Iskander is a short-range battlefield rocket that is killing a lot of Ukrainians now. The Russians are mass producing it, but they've taken an improved version now that flies over 1,000 miles with pinpoint accuracy, can defeat any air defense system, and they're mass producing that as well. So it's not just Oreshnik. Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, alluded to these new weapons. One of those is this. I think there's another one out there, called the Skorost, which again is an intermediate range missile, hypersonic, capable of pinpoint accuracy, that's being deployed. The Russians aren't using these weapons, but if they did use these weapons, it would be literally game-changing overnight. Nothing survives these weapons because nothing can shoot them down, and they have pinpoint accuracy and they can reach into the depth. So NATO and Ukraine are operating with this false sense of accomplishment because they wake up in the morning and go, we're still alive. That must mean we're doing something right. No, it just means that Russia has allowed you to live another day. It's very dangerous what the EU is doing now, and then they're starting to play games with the global economy. They're talking about taking the $300 billion of seized Russian assets. Understand, if you do that, literally the trust and confidence the world has in Europe as a participant in, international finance is over because you just become a thief. Moreover, there's about $400 billion worth of European assets in Russia. And Putin's getting ready to sign a document that says those belong to us now. $400 billion. You want to steal our money? We'll just take what's in here as compensation. They're not going to win. These are just stupid people who are they're unwilling to admit that they lost, that they gambled badly and they lost. Now they're doubling down on everything. This is like going to Las Vegas and putting your car payment on the line and losing, and deciding therefore it's a good idea to put your mortgage and everything that allows you to stay in your home on the line. You're going to lose that too. The odds are in the favor of the house. Europe is going to lose badly, and we may have a war. And I just want to tell people that this will be the end of us all. There's no such thing as a limited war. Once we begin to engage, it will go nuclear. And with 100% certainty, every limited nuclear exchange eventually turns into a full-scale nuclear exchange where everybody dies. That's the direction we're heading right now. It's a very, very dangerous time. We can sit here and mock NATO all we want, but if they continue to do stupid things, there will be stupid consequences.
It comes down to this. Wars are won, every war ends sooner or later, and wars are won and wars are lost. And NATO, um, you know, tried Russia. Okay, we're going to take Ukraine, we're going to surround Russia with military, and eventually we'll use Ukraine. And then, of course, this great plan. We'll use it, we'll get this war started, we'll take Ukraine out. Take Russia out with, economic sanctions, blah, blah, blah. It didn't work. You lost. They lost this thing when the sanctions didn't work. But now they had to kinetically keep pushing it because they couldn't, we can't afford to take a loss. In the end, there's only one question: how NATO loses. Because it's already lost. You know what? When I say lost, here's what I mean. It's already lost. You and I play chess, and when we play in a chess game, at some point, one of us looks at the board and says, that's it. I look at the board and I say, well, if I go here, Scott does this. If I do there, Scott does this. There's still pieces on the board. There's appearance that the game is still going on, but we both look at it and we both know that this game's all, you know what I mean? That we just say, screw this. Let's start over again. But at some point you look. Right now, there's pieces on the board. This guy's fighting. They're shipping drones. They're talking about various missiles that they can send and what they'll do over Western Ukraine. There's still pieces on the board, but this game's over. And the only question is, at what point do you have to keep moving pieces? Okay, I'll do this. Scott's going to do that. Well, then I'm going to do this. Well, he's going to do that. Let's not pretend anymore. The war is lost. The chess game is over. And let's just turn the board over, okay, and put new pieces on the board and do something else. So the only question is, at the point that it's checkmate, how do they accept it, or do they pretend that it's not checkmate and throw themselves into the fire?
Yeah, let's modify that chess game. Every move costs you money. So first of all, there's a buy-in to get to the chessboard. Boom. Now you're there, and every move costs you money. And if that was the case, it's like poker. You fold. Why?
Yeah.
I put my ante in, but probably not going to win this hand. I fold. I remain in the game. But in chess, because it progresses, every move costs you money. And each move costs you more money. So therefore, the smart person, as you're going through the game, you go, I'm going click, 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 click. I'm out of here in 20 moves. There's no reason for me to pay. I fold, take my money, go back and play another game in hopes that you can get, that you can win, get the situation. But here what's happened is they've run out of money. There's still 20 moves left. They're going to the bank to borrow more money, and they can't win. And they know they can't win. They're hoping that Russia will make a mistake, that there will be a draw, that Russia's mommy will call and they'll have to go and take out the garbage or something. They're hoping something happens that it doesn't allow Russia to finish this game. But the game is going to be finished, and Russia is going to win, and it's going to cost Europe and the United States everything if they stay on this game board. And ultimately, then what they're going to do is say, okay, we're going to wipe the board. That's nuclear war. I mean, both sides have the option of wiping the board at any time. But when you do that, nobody wins the game. The game's over.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Let us look. Wait a minute. What happened? There we go. Let's get to the important part here, Scott. Scott Ritter's got a great website. You can go to scottritter.com and it'll take you to his Substack where he's involved in all kinds of good works. Scott, what's happening at scottritter.com?
Well, we got a couple things going on. One, I've started a sort of an experiment in self-publication. I have a book that I finished called The Scud Hunters. It's about hunting scuds during the Gulf War and finishing the job as a weapons inspector. I think it's the part that says Scud Hunters book up there. But and what I've decided to do is publish the book on my Substack page as a different way of publication to see how this works. So I've got the prologue and I've got chapter 1. Every week I'll put a new chapter up there, and so it's a chance for people to read a piece of history. I will tell you that what's written in this book you'll find nowhere else. This gets the Iraqi perspective, of their ballistic missile program, how they fought the war, and also from the perspective of the Americans that fought the war. And I was in a unique position. I was heavily involved in the Scud conflict at every level. And when I was a UN weapons inspector, I did the investigation into how Iraq did it, and I interviewed the commanding general, General Ayubi, his entire staff. I got access to their war diaries that nobody else has. And so I'm able to tell the story from both sides. And then as a weapons inspector, I worked with the Israelis. I worked, again, in investigating. And so it's a unique story of, how we ended up accounting for the Scuds and, ending that aspect. The Scud hunt ended officially in October of 1994. We continued to play stupid games, but in October 1994 is when the Israelis recognized that there were no Scuds left, and it was really all about Israel the entire time. So, anyways, that book, I do the Russia House. We just had some very interesting interviews. The most recent one published was with Anatoly Kazakovich. He's an explorer that in 2013 took a catamaran through Lake Baikal down up a river to the ocean, and then sailed it through the Bering Straits to Alaska, and basically to mark the history of the Siberian Alaska Company, which was an all-Russian company back when Alaska belonged to Russia, but also promote U.S.-Russian relations. And next summer, he's going to do sort of a similar expedition, but this one's going to be done by seaplane. During World War II, we sent 8,000 American military aircraft from Alaska to Russia through the Alaska-Siberian route. And he's going to retrace that using aircraft. So he's going to fly from Irkutsk and then retrace that route back down to Alaska to Sitka, and then bring it back. It's a great expedition. Again, the idea is to bring the United States and Russia better, closer together. And I hope to be a part of that expedition. It'd be pretty cool to fly around in a seaplane for a while. But that's the Russia House. And then, I also just publish regular articles. I did an article called Boots on the Ground, which talked about the rally we were just in, Garland. And, the fact of the matter is, while we had great speakers and everybody's heart was in the right place, it was very poorly intended. And Gerald Salante, the organizer, lost a lot of money on this. And it may have been the last Kingston Peace Rally. That will, that's a shame because he's been doing it for, 11 years now. But nobody showed up. I mean, that's a problem with the anti-war crowd. And maybe it's part of the whole, post Charlie Kirk thing. But we had good security. But people didn't show up. And if you don't show up, then it withers away and dies. We had great speakers. Garland spoke there. Judge Napolitano spoke there. Roger Waters did a fantastic presentation. And, it just didn't get to the people that showed up were great. And I thank every single one of you who showed up. You did a fantastic job, but we need boots on the ground. It's called Occupy Peace, but you can't occupy something remotely. You have to physically be present. And this is one of the problems we have with the overall anti-war movement is that we're not getting the boots on the ground. While we were there in Kingston, 100,000 Germans were in the streets in Berlin protesting against, the German government's moves. And there's going to be bigger demonstrations. It's a shame that Europe seems to be able to generate, more boots on the grounds than the United States can at this juncture. And yet we're the nation that needs to have the fundamental changes in policy. We have to find a way to convince the Trump administration not to do what they're doing because the consequences are war. But we can't do it by social media alone. There has to be physical events where people seize the ground and make a statement, physically be present. And I just hope that, I hope and pray that that we're able to convince Gerald to give it one more try. That next year, maybe we can we can pull it off, and then we can find somebody to turn it over to, pass the baton. But it's a very valuable venue. It's a valuable program. It'd be a shame to see it dissipate because of this. But that's what's going on. And then, I'm preparing for a big month in November, going to Russia to confront Russophobia head on, to empower myself and empower Garland Nixon through, discussions with Russians. And I'm excited about it. I think Garland is getting excited. Maybe as it's starting to become a reality, but then we've got to take this message and bring it back to the American people. And again, we can do it via podcasts and such, but the American people have to weaponize the information that we're giving them. And the best way to weaponize it is through, holding events where boots on the ground. That's what wakes politicians up. The physical presence of people wakes. It was 1 million people in Central Park in June of 1982 that let the Reagan administration know the American people wanted arms control. And it helped push Ronald Reagan to sign the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty in December of 1987. 1 million people did that. If only 100 people showed up, I don't think Reagan would have gotten the same message. So we've got to find a way to get boots on the ground.
All right. Thank you very much, Scott Ritter. Everybody go to scottritter.com for more information to keep up with what Scott's doing. You can be, he's got Trump Watch. The Russia House is great. That's on Telegram. Lots of things to do, lots of ways to get involved and follow Scott's good work. Everyone, if you can afford it, you see everything scrolling across the bottom. If you can donate to the channel, that's great. Even if you can't, the most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.